The air inside Buckingham Palace trembled with tension. The chandeliers glittered above hundreds of guests, unaware that history was about to turn against its own queen. Then, a sudden echo of boots, the heavy doors burst open, and silence fell. Every royal gaze fixed on Camilla, her smile faltering as the Lord Chancellor stepped forward. What followed wasn't ceremony, it was judgment. And when the royal guards moved in, the unthinkable happened. The palace erupted in applause. Justice, at last, had found its way to the throne. If you love deep royal mysteries and moments where truth shatters tradition, you are in the right place. Hit like, tap subscribe, and ring that bell so you never miss the real stories behind the palace walls. And stay with us till the end, because what happens after Camilla's chains echo through the throne room will leave you speechless. The morning light spilled through Buckingham Palace like liquid gold, brushing across marble floors that had seen centuries of secrets. Trumpets had sounded moments earlier, announcing what everyone believed would be a graceful royal ceremony, a celebration of duty, charity, and the crown's compassion. But beneath the sparkle, something felt wrong. Even the air seemed to hesitate. Rows of dignitaries filled the throne room. Ambassadors, ministers, nobles in polished shoes and practiced smiles. Children from London orphanages sat in the front row, their eyes wide with awe. The palace staff whispered that it was one of the most beautiful mornings in years. No one could have imagined that within the hour, that beauty would break. At the center of it all stood Queen Camilla, radiant in a deep blue gown, diamonds glittering like captured stars. She smiled, the kind of smile crafted through years of practice, calm and commanding. Her crown caught the light of the chandeliers, scattering 1,000 sparks across the hall. And yet, behind that elegance, a shadow flickered. King Charles sat nearby, older, paler than usual. His eyes were tired. The weight of the crown had never seemed heavier. Every now and then he glanced at Camilla, and each time his gaze lingered just a second too long, as though he were memorizing her face for reasons even he couldn't explain aloud. The orchestra fell silent. The ceremony was about to begin. A herald announced the day's purpose: to honor Her Majesty's unwavering dedication to the charities of our beloved nation. Polite applause followed. Reporters raised cameras, the flashbulbs cutting through the gold haze of morning. And then, bang! The massive oak doors at the back of the hall slammed open. A sound like thunder rolled through the chamber. Every head turned, every conversation died. Through the doors marched a line of officials in dark suits, their footsteps sharp and synchronized. The man leading them, tall, silver-haired, face carved with authority, was Sir Malcolm Peaton, the Lord Chancellor of Britain. He carried a leather folder tucked under one arm. He bowed before the king. "Your Majesty." Charles nodded faintly, as though the weight of that single gesture cost him strength. Camilla's smile faltered. Her hand went instinctively to the pearls around her neck. A tie-oi, nervous motion, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The audience watched, confused but intrigued. Cameras kept rolling. No one knew it yet, but history had just turned a page. Sir Malcolm's voice carried across the hall. "Your Majesty, members of the royal household, distinguished guests, I appear before you today by the authority of His Majesty's government and the order of Parliament." The silence that followed was almost physical. Even the children in the front row sat frozen, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. Camilla's brow creased. "What is this?" she whispered to Charles. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked forward, his jaw trembling slightly. Sir Malcolm opened his folder, revealing a stack of documents. "After an 18-month investigation," he continued, "we have confirmed allegations of serious financial misconduct involving charitable funds under Her Majesty's patronage." The words hit the hall like a detonation. Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters leaned forward. Somewhere in the back, a chair scraped loudly against the floor, the only sound in the vast room. Camilla blinked, as though she hadn't understood. "What nonsense is this?" Sir Malcolm didn't look up. He kept reading. "Our investigation has uncovered the diversion of approximately £47 million from charitable foundations. These funds were moved to private offshore accounts through a network of shell companies. He paused, meeting her eyes at last. The evidence is overwhelming. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Camilla's face drained of color. "You dare accuse me of theft?" she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I've devoted my life to these causes." King Charles finally spoke, softly, brokenly. "I wanted to believe it wasn't true. I prayed it wasn't. But I've seen the proof, Camilla." The room inhaled in unison.
It was no longer rumor. The king himself had confirmed it. Sir Malcolm's tone grew heavier. "Your Majesty, further evidence reveals attempts to manipulate royal succession and diminish the roles of the Prince and Princess of Wales. There are also records of blackmail. Palace staff coerced into silence under threat of fabricated charges." Every word struck like a hammer. Prince William's jaw clenched. From the gallery, Princess leaned forward, eyes narrowed, her face unreadable. Camilla shook her head in disbelief. "Lies! All of it." But no one came to her defense. The king rose slowly, his scepter trembling in his hand. "Camilla," he said quietly, "you betrayed the crown, the people, and me." The chandeliers seemed to dim. Sir Malcolm nodded to the guards. The rustle of armor echoed through the marble room as 6 royal guards stepped forward. Their movements were deliberate, rehearsed, yet weighted with hesitation. No one wanted to be the first to touch a queen. Camilla's voice cracked. "Charles, stop them. You can't let them." But he didn't move. "By order of Parliament," Sir Malcolm declared, "and with the consent of His Majesty the King, you are hereby stripped of all royal titles and privileges. You are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The guards surrounded her. The clink of handcuffs echoed like metal thunder. And then something extraordinary happened. A single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then 100 more. Applause, not joyous, but fierce, cathartic, full of long-suppressed anger, rolled through the throne room. Staff members, charity representatives, even some nobles joined in. For years they had whispered, suspected, feared. Now the truth was laid bare. Justice had walked through the palace doors. Camilla stood motionless, diamonds catching the light one last time as her crown tilted slightly forward. The weight of it, and of everything she had done, pressed down on her until she looked smaller, older, human. The applause grew into a storm, echoing against the walls where portraits of monarchs watched silently from centuries past. For the first time in history, the people inside Buckingham Palace clapped not for royalty, but for accountability. As the guards escorted her out, her gown trailed behind her like a fallen banner. The oak doors opened again, letting in the blinding sunlight of the outside world. Somewhere, a child's voice whispered, "Is she a bad queen?" No one answered. The silence said enough. And when the doors closed, the sound of that applause lingered, a haunting reminder that even within the walls of kings, justice can roar louder than power. 3 months later, the gray towers of London loomed over a scene the nation could hardly believe. The trial of a former queen. The world watched as armored police vans rolled toward the Old Bailey, the city's most storied courthouse. Crowds pressed against iron barricades. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning in a storm. And inside one of those vans sat Camilla Parker Bowles, no longer a queen, just a woman in custody. Dressed in a plain navy suit, her wrists shackled loosely in front of her. Her face was pale but composed. Years of public scrutiny had trained her to hide her fear. But this was no press conference. This was Judgment Day. When the van stopped, the noise outside surged. People shouted her name, some in anger, a few in pity. A voice rose from the crowd. "You stole from children." Another, "Shame!" She stepped out, blinking under the camera lights. For the first time in her life, she had no guards to guide her, no red carpet beneath her feet, only cold pavement. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every seat in the public gallery was taken. Journalists, charity representatives, former palace staff. The press had dubbed it the crown's darkest hour. As the judge entered, everyone rose. The air felt heavy with history. Camilla sat beside her lawyer, Martin Ashford, who adjusted his tie, but avoided her eyes. Across the aisle sat Rebecca Thornton, the lead prosecutor, a woman whose calm intensity could silence a room. When she spoke, her words cut like polished steel. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will see evidence of systematic deception at the highest level of public trust. The defendant, using her position as queen, orchestrated the embezzlement of nearly £50 million meant for the sick, the poor, and the young. The jurors listened in stunned silence. Rebecca lifted a document. Bank records. Transfers from royal charities to offshore accounts. Each one authorized by Mrs. Parker Bowles. She laid another sheet on the table. Emails, where she ordered subordinates to conceal financial trails. And another witness statement from staff, some threatened, others bribed. The pile grew like a mountain of evidence. Camilla sat perfectly still. Only her hands betrayed her, fingers twitching, clutching the edge of her chair. Witness after witness took the stand. Margaret Sullivan, her former secretary, voice trembling. She told me to arrange private meetings with advisors I'd never seen before. She said if I mentioned them to anyone, I'd regret it. David Chun, a banker from Singapore, appearing via video link. She instructed me to create shell companies under code names. I was told the funds were to remain off the royal radar. She was clear about what she wanted. And then Patricia Hughes, the bookkeeper whose courage had sparked it all. She spoke quietly, but every word hit like truth forged in iron. I didn't want to believe it at first. I admired her, but the numbers didn't lie. Every missing pound came from charity accounts, money meant for hospitals and schools. When I tried to raise questions, I was warned to keep quiet. The courtroom murmured. Camilla's face tightened, but she didn't look away. During cross-examination, Martin Ashford did what he could. His tone was measured, almost gentle. Mrs. Hughes, he said, you admit you never saw my client physically transfer funds yourself? No, Patricia replied, but I saw her signature on every approval. And could someone else have used her authorization without her knowledge? She met his gaze evenly, perhaps once, not dozens of times over 10 years. The defense faltered. There was simply too much evidence, too many threads leading back to one person. Still, Martin tried to remind the jury of her humanity. My client has made mistakes, he said, but she is not a monster. She has also raised millions legitimately, supported victims of abuse, and championed literacy programs. Let us not forget the good amid the wrongdoing. But even he knew the scale of her crimes had drowned out any light that remained. As the trial continued, the nation was transfixed. Television screens replayed every word, every image. Opinion columns filled with fury and disbelief. Some pitied Camilla, saying the monarchy had crushed her spirit long ago. Others saw her as a symbol of everything broken in privilege, a woman who had everything and still wanted more. At the palace, King Charles watched from afar. He had not attended the trial. Tradition forbade it. But each night, reports were delivered to his desk. And each night, he felt the same ache, the ache of a man who had offended love against the world, only to see that love destroy itself. One evening, Prince William came to see him. The two men sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Finally, William spoke. You did the right thing, father. People see that. They trust you again. Charles nodded slowly. And yet I feel no victory, only loss. I built a life with her, believing in her heart. But the crown has a cruel way of revealing who we truly are. William hesitated. And what will you do now? Rebuild, Charles said simply. Stone by stone, truth by truth. Back in the courtroom, the defense rested. There was nothing more to say. The evidence spoke louder than words ever could. The judge gave the jury their instructions. Consider the facts. Leave emotion aside. Deliver justice without fear or favor. The jurors retired. Outside, thousands waited. Inside, minutes turned to hours. Then, as evening fell, the jury returned. The clerk stood. Members of the jury, have you reached a unanimous verdict? The forewoman, a middle-aged teacher with kind eyes, stood slowly. We have. On the charge of fraud, how you find defendant? Guilty. On the charge of embezzlement? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy? Guilty. Each word fell like a hammer. Camilla sat motionless, tears sliding down her face. Martin rested a hand on her arm, but she barely noticed. The courtroom was silent, not the silence of shock, but of closure. The judge, Lord Justice Harrison, looked down at her. Mrs. Parker Bowles, you have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. You will remain in custody until then. Guards stepped forward. Camilla rose slowly. For a brief second, she turned toward the gallery and saw her son, Tom, watching her with eyes full of heartbreak. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled too much to hold it. As she was led away, flashes from cameras lit the hallway outside. Reporters shouted questions, but no answer came. The doors closed behind her, sealing away the last illusion of royalty. Outside, a cheer rose from the crowd, not of cruelty, but catharsis. A queen had fallen. A nation had exhaled. And in the echoes of those cheers, justice found its voice again. Outside the palace, the London air crackled with disbelief. Within an hour, news networks interrupted every program. The image replayed again and again. Queen Camilla, handcuffed, escorted to the palace gates under a sea of flashing cameras. But inside the throne room, silence reigned. The applause had faded. Only echoes remained. King Charles sat back down on his throne, but his posture was different now, not regal, but weary. The scepter rested loosely in his trembling hand. For a man who had spent a lifetime waiting to be king, this moment should have been his crown's glory. Instead, it felt like punishment. Sir Malcolm closed his folder. Your Majesty, the government will proceed with formal charges. Her Majesty. Charles stopped him with a raised hand. His voice cracked as he said, She is no longer Her Majesty. Not anymore. That single sentence carried the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. Princess stepped closer, her face carved from steel. You did the right thing, she said quietly, but the world will not go easy on you. They'll question how much you knew. Charles's reply was almost a whisper. I knew enough to feel ashamed. Across the room, Prince William stood still, his expression unreadable. Catherine's hand rested lightly on his arm, grounding him in the storm. William had always been respectful toward Camilla. Never close, never cruel, but deep down, he had never trusted her. His mother's memory had seen to that. Now, looking at the empty space where Camilla had stood moments ago, he felt something unfamiliar, not triumph, but a solemn vindication. He turned to his father. The people will need to hear from you soon. You can't hide from this. Charles nodded faintly. I won't, but right now, I need a moment as a husband, not as a king. William hesitated, then bowed slightly and left with Catherine. The room emptied slowly until only Charles remained. He looked around the gilded chamber, the portraits of monarchs past, the marble lions, the tapestries of victory, and wondered how many of them had faced a trail this raw, this personal. The door creaked open again. A soft voice spoke. Your Majesty? It was Patricia Hughes, the quiet bookkeeper whose discovery had started everything. Her gray suit looked plain against the grandeur of the room, but her presence carried quiet power. Charles gestured for her to step closer. You are the one who uncovered the truth, he said. You must have known what this would mean. Patricia hesitated. I knew it would be painful, Your Majesty, but wrong is wrong, even when it wears a crown. For a moment, Charles's eyes glistened. You've done your country a great service. No, sir, she said softly. I've done my duty. The real service is yours, to lead through the storm. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. Hours later, Buckingham Palace was sealed off. Reporters surrounded every gate. Crowds gathered outside, some holding signs of support for the king, others demanding accountability. Inside, a different drama unfolded. In a gray interrogation room at Scotland Yard, Camilla sat alone. Her diamond-studded gown had been replaced by a simple navy coat. Her hair, once immaculate, had loosened in the chaos. Across from her sat Inspector Sarah Morrison, sharp-eyed, calm, and relentless. Mrs. Parker Bowles, she said deliberately, refusing to use any royal title. You're being charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Camilla flinched at the sound of her old name. I want my lawyer, she snapped. He's on his way, Morrison replied coolly. But while we wait, I'd like you to look at something. She opened a folder, not unlike Sir Malcolm's, and laid out evidence piece by piece. Bank statements, property deeds, email transcripts, photographs of luxury estates. 47 million pounds, Morrison said. That's how much was stolen from the charities under your patronage. That money was meant for hospitals, schools, orphanages. Tell me Excuse me, Mrs. Parker Bowles, how do you justify that? Camilla's hands trembled. I don't have to answer you. You don't, Morrison agreed. But I think of the children who waited for medical equipment that never came. I think of the elderly who died in underfunded care homes. Do you think of them? Camilla's silence was answer enough. Moments later, her lawyer, Martin Ashford, entered, tall, graying, carrying the air of a man who had offended both saints and sinners. He shook the inspector's hand curtly. We'll speak privately. When the door closed, Camilla exhaled. Martin, you can fix this. You always fix things. He studied her. This isn't a misunderstanding, Camilla. It's a catastrophe. They have everything. The bank records, the shell companies, even recordings of your calls. Her voice cracked. Then say I didn't know. Say I was misled. By whom? He asked softly. The accountants you handpicked? The assistants you threatened? The charities you controlled? She glared at him, tears welling in her eyes. You don't understand. I did this for survival. They never accepted me, not truly. Not the public, not the family. I had to build something of my own. Martin leaned forward. And you built it on stolen lives. For the first time, her defiance broke. She slumped back in the chair, eyes red. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Intent doesn't erase consequences, he said gently. There was a knock on the door. An officer entered with papers for Camilla to sign, her formal statement of arrest. As she took the pen, her hand trembled so violently that the ink bled across the page. Back at the palace, night fell heavy and silent. Charles sat alone in his study, the same one where he had once signed love letters and official decrees alike. On his desk sat a single photograph, he and Camilla on their wedding day, smiling under a gray sky. He picked it up, stared for a long time, then turned it face down. The fire in the hearth flickered weakly, throwing long shadows that danced across the portraits of his ancestors. Their faces seemed to watch him with quiet judgment, and entered quietly. Parliament wants a statement by morning, she said. They're calling this the greatest scandal since Edward VIII. Charles gave a weary smile. At least he left for love. Mine ends in betrayal. She crossed the room and placed a hand on his shoulder. This is not your fault, Charles. It's hers. You stood for truth, and that matters. He looked at his sister, the one person who had always spoken to him not as a king, but as a brother. Does it? The monarchy has survived wars and divorces, but can it survive this? And his tone softened. Only if you remind them why it exists, not to rule but to serve. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he rose, straightened his jacket, and looked toward the window where the palace courtyard glowed under camera flashes. Then tomorrow, he said, I will speak, not as a man mourning his wife, but as a king restoring his people's faith. As the clock struck midnight, Camilla sat alone in a holding cell, staring at her reflection in the metal table. No crown, no court, no applause, only silence, and the echo of the last thing she had heard inside the palace. The sound of people clapping as the guards led her away. It had sounded, she realized now, like the closing of a door she would never walk through again. 2 weeks later, the sun rose over London with a strange quiet. The city felt as if it were holding its breath. At the Old Bailey, crowds gathered once more. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, their microphones aimed at the courthouse steps. The world waited for the final verdict, the sentence that would end one of the most extraordinary chapters in modern royal history. Inside, The courtroom was silent when Camilla Parker Bowles entered. She looked thinner, paler, older. Time had already begun to carve its punishment upon her face. Gone was a confident queen. In her place stood a woman humbled by her own choices. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Lord Justice Harrison adjusted his glasses and began to speak, his tone steady, solemn. "This court has presided over many cases of betrayal and greed," he said, "but few compare to this. You held one of the most privileged positions in this nation. You had influence, wealth, and the trust of millions, and yet you used that power to steal from the very people you were meant to serve." He paused, his gaze unwavering. Children went without medicine, schools without teachers, the elderly without care, all while you lived in luxury. These were not momentary lapses. They were deliberate acts of deception sustained over years. The hall was still. Even the air seemed afraid to move. Camilla stood motionless, tears gathering but never falling. "For these crimes," the judge continued, "you are sentenced to 18 years imprisonment. You will serve no fewer than 12 before being eligible for parole. You are also ordered to forfeit all assets acquired through these crimes and to repay the charities in full." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. 18 years. Camilla closed her eyes. Her lawyer, Martin Ashford, whispered something, perhaps comfort, perhaps resignation, but she didn't respond. Her hands trembled slightly, the faint jingle of her restraints echoing in the silence. The judge leaned forward. "I hope, Mrs. Parker Bowles, that during your time in prison you will reflect on the suffering you caused, because for all your wealth and status, you were poorer than those you stole from, poor in empathy, in conscience, in grace." Then, softly, "Take her down." The guards approached. Camilla turned once, glancing toward the public gallery. Her son, Tom, sat there, tears in his eyes, but no anger left, only sorrow. She mouthed 2 words that no one but him could hear. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, silently, and then she was gone, escorted to the same heavy doors that had opened for a coronation years ago. The sound of them closing was final, like the end of an era. That evening, King Charles sat alone in his study at Buckingham Palace. The fire crackled softly. On the desk before him lay stacks of reports, letters from Parliament, and one old photograph. His wedding day with Camilla. He stared at it for a long time. The door opened. Princess entered quietly. "It's over," she said gently. "Yes," Charles replied. "At last." She took a seat beside him. "You've done what had to be done. The monarchy survived because you let justice, not emotion, lead." Charles gave a faint smile. "Justice is heavy, but it's lighter than guilt." Hours later, a red light flickered in the palace broadcast room. Across the nation, televisions lit up. The king appeared, seated behind his oak desk, the Union Jack draped behind him. His eyes looked tired, but steady. "My fellow citizens," he began, "today a painful chapter in our history has ended. The woman who was my wife and your queen has been sentenced to prison for crimes that have brought great shame upon this institution, and upon me personally. I feel no triumph in this, only sorrow and the weight of responsibility." He paused, voice trembling slightly. "To the charities, to the children, to every person who suffered because of these crimes, I am deeply, personally sorry. You placed your trust in the crown, and that trust was betrayed." He looked straight into the camera, into the hearts of millions. "But let me also say this. One person's wrongdoing does not destroy an entire institution. The monarchy will not hide. It will change. Transparency will be our new tradition. Accountability our new crown." His words were quiet, but they carried power, the kind of power born not from command, but from humility. "I will personally fund a compensation program to restore what was lost. Every stolen pound will be returned. And I pledge that from this day forward, no act of charity done in the name of the crown will ever be hidden from public eyes again." He took a deep breath. "In the end, justice is not about vengeance. It is about truth. And though this truth has broken my heart, it has also freed it. We must learn and we must do better." The broadcast ended. Outside, the world was silent for a moment. Then applause broke out in the streets. Not for power, not for royalty, but for honesty. For once, the British people did not see a king sitting on a throne. They saw a man who had chosen truth over love, duty over silence. And in that choice, the monarchy found something it had nearly lost: its soul. Weeks later, Buckingham Palace was a different place. The royal charities reopened their accounts, now transparent and audited by independent hands. Donations poured in from around the world, not out of loyalty, but respect. In a small hospital in Manchester, new medical equipment arrived, bought with the recovered funds. Nurses wept as the first child received treatment from the very machines that greed had once denied them. In Birmingham, a school expanded its classrooms, finally launching its long-delayed special education program. The students cheered when a new sign went up: the Hope Wing, funded by the people. Even the palace staff, once fearful, now proud, worked with renewed purpose. The echo of applause that had once filled those marble halls no longer sounded like judgment. It sounded like redemption. And in a quiet cell in Yorkshire, Camilla sat by a small window, writing letters she would never send. She had traded her crown for reflection, her jewels for solitude. Sometimes she thought of the applause, the one that had followed her arrest. At first, she had hated that sound. Now she understood it. It was not applause for her downfall. It was applause for the truth. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "At least the crown survived me. What do we take from this? Power doesn't make a person untouchable. It tests who they really are. Even in palaces of gold, the truth will find a way to shine through cracks of deceit. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the applause of ordinary people who dare to hope for honesty. And sometimes the most powerful crown is conscience. If you felt that story, give it a like, not for the scandal, but for the reminder that truth still matters. Subscribe for more true royal dramas, where power, love, and humanity collide. And remember, even in the grandest halls of history, justice has a heartbeat.